Hi, thanks for joining me. It's about 10 days after the Mudcrew Arc of Attrition winter 100-mile ultramarathon on the Cornish Coast Path in the UK. And if you've watched any of my recce videos and you were hoping that I would do a full race video, I'm so sorry. I really hope you understand. I decided to leave my camera because I didn't want to get distracted and fall off a cliff, and I didn't want to give the camera to my husband who was crewing for me because I wanted him to be able to concentrate on the crewing and looking after himself. So here I am with the race report instead, and I hope that you get something from it. Whether you did the ARC this year and you're just interested in other people's experiences, or you're planning to do it in the future, hopefully there'll be something that you can take from it. I'll talk about a few things. I'll talk about my goals for going into the race, my training and preparation. I'll talk a little bit about the conditions, the kit that I used, and my nutrition. Talk about how my body held out, how my mind held out, the highs, some of the lows, and the lessons that I learned. And then I'll do a little bit of number crunching at the end and give you the outcome of the race, and also what's next. Will I ever run 100 miles again? Will I enter another race like that, or the Arc of Attrition? So I'll go through all of those bits, hopefully some of it's of interest. So this was my first 100-mile foot race. Arguably maybe not the best one to pick as the first one, but I did have some experience coming into it from ultra distances in canoeing. So I've done the 125-mile Devizes to Westminster canoe race a couple of times. Both of those took around, well, one was just over 21 hours, the other one over 22. So I had some experience of being cold and wet for a very long time. And I'd also done a 100-kilometre race that started in the evening. So I had an experience of running through the night time on little sleep. So some experience to take me into the race. With it being new, I didn't really know what to expect in terms of time. So my goal was to complete. That was the first goal. So getting in within the 36-hour cutoff. And I thought if I was having a good day and still able to run by the time I got to St Ives, then I would be able to go at maybe around the 34-hour mark. And if I was having a great day, maybe around 32 hours. So that's what I hoped for going into the race. In terms of my training, my mileage probably looked a little bit low for an ultra runner. I probably only averaged around 30 to 50 miles a week, and I peaked at about 60 miles a week. I would do 4 runs a week. Most of those were low intensity. I did the occasional park run and a little block of hill reps, one 4-week block in my training. That was mostly because I've had a grumbling Achilles that's quite irritable, so I couldn't push the speed sessions much. So I replaced the speed in running with high intensity on the bike once a week. So I did a spin class. I also did 3 strength and conditioning sessions a week, and I've got a strength and conditioning coach for that. So that's, for me, a really, really essential part of my training, and I really feel that it helps me a lot during that race. I have a remote program, but I've worked with Steph for a number of years prior to us going remote. Towards the end of my training, I also brought in a block of stair climber, so I worked up to an hour on the stair climber for a few weeks before the race. And then I would fit in yoga, 10 minutes in the mornings, a few times a week, as much as I could fit in, just to maintain some balance and mobility. One thing I include in my training, not for the fitness element, but for the psychological preparation, was cold water swimming. So for the last year, I've been cold water swimming almost once a week, and I find it really helpful to get used to the feeling of pushing through when everything about you is telling you not to do something. So in running, when it's really horrible and cold outside, or your legs are sore and you need to get moving again after having stiffened up, that's a feeling that can be quite difficult to overcome. And I find that the cold water swimming has really helped me push through those feelings of everything about my body wants to not do this, and then not only be able to push through, but actually enjoy it afterwards. So that was really good preparation. The longest run that I did was 39 miles, and it's not because I felt that I had to run that far, it was just that I really wanted to run this particular route. I would have been happy with 30 miles as my longest, in fact probably closer to the 20-25. Most of my longest runs were 20 miles. In terms of race prep, In the week before the race, I did lots of sleeping, knowing that I'd have a sleepless night. So I binged on sleep and I tapered early due to catching COVID at the beginning of January. It was very mild, luckily, but I did back right off the training and did very little the week in the run up to the race. I tried to eat well and I focused on my toenail care. This is an excellent book if anyone wants some advice on how to look after their feet. So I even put it in my diary so that I wouldn't forget to file my nails and get everything prepped for race day. I went to the early registration on the Thursday evening, which meant I could sleep knowing I had all my kit ready, and then on the Friday morning headed over to the Eco Park. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the race, it starts in Coverack on the south coast in Cornwall and then goes all the way through Lizard, Land's End, St Ives and up to Porthtowan on the north coast. So race headquarters is at Porthtowan at the Eco Park, and competitors are bussed from the finish to the start so that we can all start in Coverack. So on the Friday morning, headed back over to the Eco Park, had my first breakfast of the day, toast and peanut butter, and then I had another breakfast on the way to the Eco Park of overnight oats, and then I was snacking away whilst I was at registration, just getting my tracker fitted and getting ready to get on the bus. So I was constantly eating, and I had an extra bottle of Tailwind for the bus and a banana for the bus. That was really great advice. I think a few other YouTubers suggested that, because otherwise you do get pretty hungry by the time the race starts at midday on Friday. The conditions were pretty warm, so I overcooked it with kit. I wore a thick top over a base layer, suffered a little bit with being a bit too hot and sweaty for the first section, but managed to get that sorted by the time I got to Lizard. It was pretty dry underfoot. There were still some boggy patches, some bits that I don't think ever dry out on the Cornish coast path around Pendeen, but overall the conditions were brilliant. There was not a breath of wind and it made for very comfortable running most of the time, except when it was a bit too warm at the beginning. In terms of kit, I started off in Saucony Peregrine 12s and they stayed on until the road section. I'd been umming and ahhing about whether to change my shoes, and I'll explain why I did decide in the end, but I changed into Mizuno Wave Riders for the road section at Marazion. I don't really like squishy shoes, so they're fairly firm. And then I changed back into trail shoes, which were then my Saucony Exodus Ultras when I got to Mousehole, just before Mousehole. Socks wise, I started in Absolute 360s and then changed into merino wool socks, Moggen socks, and they were fantastic, super comfortable. I'm now wondering if I probably would have been better off in merino socks the whole time. Shorts, I do think it's worth mentioning the shorts, because I find it really difficult to find a pair of shorts that are long enough to prevent inner thigh chafing, and most of the shorts available seem to be around the 4-inch length, but luckily Innovate have just brought out a pair that are a 5-inch or maybe 5.5-inch, can't remember, but they were perfect. I was really pleased with them. I didn't have any problems with chafing. The waistband is super comfortable as well. I will mention headwear as well. I started off in a cap and a buff, which was great, but I do get a little bit of tension feeling from that. So when it came to the evening and I was ready to put my head torch in, I swapped that out for a much looser warm hat. And it just so happened to be super bright, which made it really easy for my husband to see me when I came into crew stops. The only problem is if you're being competitive and you don't want to be an easy target to be chased down, maybe think about having something bright on the front rather than your head. So yeah, I found it really useful, but if you're chasing for those positions, maybe something a little bit less obvious for people chasing you. The main head torch was the Petzl Neo Plus. And although it's a great torch with reactive technology, I love all of that about it and it's bright enough, the batteries do go quite quickly, I think, given all of that technology. So I had the mandatory backup battery in my bag, but I also was very fortunate. Jenny's friend lent me a couple of extra ones, so I gave those to Dan and Dan could then swap them out without me having to faff around with my bag. The idea with my kit in my bag was that I wouldn't touch it unless it was an emergency, so I was really fortunate to be in that position. I found that the battery started fading by around midnight, so luckily I managed to get to Dan just as the torch was really starting to fade, and he was able to then swap my battery without me having to dig into my bag. My Garmin, I was really pleased with that. So I've got a Garmin Fenix 6S Pro and I had it in ultra mode, which meant that it didn't measure the heart rate, it didn't have a backlight, and the whole screen switched off when I didn't have my watch in front of me, so it would just automatically turn off. The battery lasted into the night time, and then I decided to use a little power bank about the size of a lipstick. I can't remember what the tech figures are for that, but that worked really well, just to plug it in so that I could keep my watch in my pocket and still see the navigation screen, the map screen, if I needed to. But that then charged up full, and I gave that power bank back to my husband, and I was able to carry on for the rest of the event with that fully charged, so with enough charge. So I was really, really pleased with my Garmin, and it was quite useful to be able to see where I was going, and how many miles it was until the next time I would meet Dan or to a checkpoint. And it even gave me an estimated time of arrival at the finish when I eventually was interested in that kind of figure. Poles, I used initially I started with Black Diamond Z Carbon. I think they're the Distant Z Carbon poles. I've used those before in races and found them really useful, been quite happy with them, but unfortunately I noticed a few weeks ago that one of the buttons had gone rusty, making it a bit difficult to put down the poles when I didn't want to use them. And in some races it's fine just to hold them in your hands, I think, but I was really concerned, knowing about the boulders and some of the narrow paths on the Cornish coast path. They can actually be a bit of a hindrance and can get stuck. So I panicked a little bit, and I thought, I don't want that to be the thing that ends my race, not being able to put my poles away and not be able to use them in a way that was comfortable for me. So I did the unthinkable, and Centurion had a shop at the race headquarters in Porthtowan, and I bought myself a brand new pair of shiny poles. I bought some Lucky poles, and in my defence, I have had my eye on them for a long time, and they were there, I saw it as a sign, and I bought them. And I'm so glad that I did, because I used them much more in the race than I would have used my Black Diamond ones, just because of the system for connecting to the pole. So instead of having to put my hand through a strap all the time, I was able just to click in and out because I had the glove on permanently. And that meant that I wasn't worried about getting them out just for short periods, because I knew that it was easy to get them detached and put them away if I wanted to. So I was really pleased with those. Thank you so much, Centurion. Nutrition, I didn't really have a very strict strategy, but I knew I was going to get some of my calories in through Tailwind. So I had a bottle of Tailwind and a bottle of water, and then I had a gel every time I saw Dan at the van, so he'd give me one to take away with me. And then in terms of real food, I mostly relied on crisps and waffles, chocolate waffles, sweets and fruit, that sort of a thing. And the only problem with the crisps is towards the end of the race, I think it was around Godrevy, I really wanted some salt and vinegar crisp, but my lips get incredibly sore and red during an ultra. I don't know why. Did it happen to anyone else? But my lips were really sore, and I tried to put too many salt and vinegar Pringles in my mouth at one time, and oh my goodness, it stung so much. So it's the one picture of me during the whole race where I look pretty miserable, and it is because of that. In terms of substantial food, the only real more filling food that I had was a pot noodle about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I also had some chips at the Penzance checkpoint. My body held out pretty well during the event. The few problems that I did have, one was maceration of my feet. I do get that. I've had it before on races. I've had it once before where it's been incredibly painful, and this time I was really surprised at how early it came on, given how dry the conditions were. I noticed that my feet were macerated and getting quite painful as I approached the Porthleven checkpoint. So I'd gone through just one small section of wet ground, and I developed this really sore spot underneath the ball of my foot. I thought it was a stone in my shoe. I stopped to take it out. It wasn't. It was just the skin on my feet, and I did start to panic, if I'm perfectly honest. And that's why I changed into my road shoes. I wanted dry feet. So Dan had everything laid out. I stopped, dried, talced my feet, put on some clean socks and shoes, and that was magic. Really, really helped. And it didn't become too painful for the rest of my time out on the course. The other issue I developed was an irritation of my tibialis anterior tendon, which is at the front of the ankle, and I don't know what happened. I think it's because when I changed into my road shoes, I left my gaiters on and just pulled them up a little bit out of the way, with the idea that it would be quicker to get my trail shoes back on and the gaiters over the top. And I think in doing that, I managed to roll some of the bottom of my calf sleeve and create like a little extra bit of fabric, so that it was putting more pressure on that area. I think that's why it happened. It could have been when I stumbled a little bit and maybe I didn't notice that I'd banged the front of my ankle, but it was really uncomfortable. I tried to sort out my socks, kind of helped a little bit, but the damage had been done. It irritated, something had set off, and I've had it before where it's been excruciating and I haven't been able to walk, let alone run. So I was pretty nervous about that. I did go to the physios at the Land's End checkpoint and asked them to give me a hand, and they were fantastic. What's worked for me in the past is some taping, like a stirrup technique, to hold my foot into a bit of dorsiflexion. That's where your toes are kind of aiming up towards your shin. And that just meant that my foot was had a bit of support when it was lowering down on the ground, and that's the bit that I find really painful if that tendon gets irritated. So thank you so much to the team at Land's End who patched me up. Again, I think that would have been race ending if that hadn't been sorted, so thank you so much for that. The only other thing that I noticed being a little bit sore was my right quad towards the end, and I think that's just because I wasn't running quite as normally because of my left ankle. Although I could still keep moving, I was moving a little bit differently, particularly going down hills and down steps. My mind also held up pretty well. I had a good time. In general, I had a really good time. I did experience some hallucinations, although very mild. Coming into Zena, I thought that the rocks on the cliff face were people, and I was convinced that there were people behind me all the time. Every time I turned around, there was nobody there. So mild hallucinations, nothing particularly exciting to report there. I didn't really have a strategy for the race, but one thing that I did take with me, which I think helped with my mind, was breaking the course up into chunks. So I broke it up in my head into the recce's that I'd done, and I never thought about the whole thing at once. That would have been too much for me to think about. So I had the classic quarter in my head. I ticked that off. I had that first recce that I did. That was again tick when I'd finished that. So that really helped me break it into little chunks and help me keep going. The other thing that I think really helped with my head was knowing the course. I knew what to expect. That first section from Coverack to Lizard, a lot of people struggle with that because they find that it's a lot more gnarly than they were expecting, and they don't expect to have to work so hard at the beginning. Also, I think people get quite stressed when they get stuck in a queue of people joining the coast path. Now, I knew all of that from having done the recce and listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos, so I was mentally prepared and I was very happy with that. I knew it was going to be a bit slow going, and I didn't let it stress me out, and I do think that that helped. It also helped in my mind that I knew what climbs were coming towards the end. So the two before Portreath, the descent and ascent back out of Portreath, two more big climbs, and then the final climb into the eco park. I had them in my head. I knew they were going to be tough, but I knew I could tick them off as I got through, and that really helped my mind as well. And I think the most important thing for my mental state was the people. So people out on the course, I shared some lovely miles with people talking about races and people's experiences. And actually it started quite early on. So at the beginning, when I was at the eco park, quite a few people came over to me to say that they'd seen some of my recce videos, and thank you so much, because that put me in such a good mood. And especially grateful because I know that at the start of a race like that, people have got their own things going on, people are nervous, you've got stuff that you're stressing about, and you know, the fact that you came over and took time to say hello really meant a lot and really put me in a great mood. Particular shout out to Michelle, Kate, Vic and John, who I met at the start and hung out with them. That really set me up for the day, and yeah, including that bus journey, it was so nice to have company, so thank you so much. So a few highs and lows. Highs I've kind of already talked about. It's that mental state, it's the people, but in addition to the fellow competitors, the archangels and the valets were brilliant at keeping me in a good mood. They really lifted my spirits when I approached aid stations. But I was also so lucky. Quite a few of my friends showed up unexpectedly on the course and afterwards, and it made such a big difference. So Jenny turned up, Jenny from my recce videos. She arrived sometime just before hail and popped up a couple more times on the course. My friend Jem with her dog saw me just before Godrivi, and Pilla joined me a couple of times on the course.
Hello Elena. How are we feeling at this point in the race when your majority is done?
Ruined.
Ruined?
Absolutely ruined.
Absolutely ruined, but still smiling, still chatting.
Once even tried to shield me while I had a wild wee. It didn't really work. I think I showed quite a few people my bare backside. Sorry about that, but you know, it had to be done. And then at the end, I was surprised by a group, my swim gang group, and they were all there at the finish. And yeah, I did shed a few tears. It was absolutely amazing and so appreciated. And Dan was an absolute legend. I know he was. He's brilliant at crewing. He knows exactly what I need, has everything sorted, does all of my problem solving for me. So it made a big difference having Dan there to help me throughout the race. He's my rock. Every race is going to come with lows, and I knew that going out there. I wasn't under any illusion that I was just going to have a blast the whole time. I mean, I pretty much did, but there were some lows. That early point when I started experiencing the maceration and the pain in my foot really concerned me. I was really nervous that was going to ruin my race and that would have me out of it. And in addition to that, as I was approaching Marazion, I went off the path to have a wee, and I have a side lunge wee technique mastered that has never failed me up until this point. And I managed to wee all over myself and all over my nice new Montane gloves, and I was so annoyed. So I was worried about my feet, I was worried about the horrific chafing I might get from having weed all over myself, and I was in a grump because my favourite gloves were now cold, wet and stinky, and I had to keep them on me because it was part of the mandatory kit, so I was annoyed about that. So that was a little bit of a low. I did have a low energy point just coming out of Sennen, and I managed to kind of get over that with a little bit of food and just generally having a word with myself to smile a bit more and cheer up. And I had another low point, again energy wise, a lot of slipping over and losing concentration through the Pendine to Zena section. So a few things to reflect on there, I think. But on the whole, I really did have an absolute blast on that race. So lessons, I think I'm going to have a go at trying some trench cream to try and prevent the maceration. I'm going to try waterproof socks as well. I've never tried them before, and I think if I was to do a race that was really, really wet, I might need to. So I'm going to experiment with that, see how I go. I think although my nutrition went okay, as in I didn't have any gastric issues, I didn't have any nausea, nothing like that. I think I could have eaten more, so I'm going to try coming up with a strategy to make me eat more often. I think it's easy on a technical trail to just forget about eating and not concentrate. So I did better at that at the beginning, but throughout the night I wasn't quite as good at keeping an eye on that. The other thing I think I needed more of was caffeine. On reflection, I didn't consume much caffeine at all, and I think it would have helped me in the night time, particularly through that Pendine to Zena section where I was using a lot of mental energy on trying not to go through too many wet patches. Probably should have just ploughed on through, but I'd got obsessed with this maceration issue. So I think caffeine might have helped me stay a little bit more alert and kept me going a little bit stronger through that section. The other thing I think I'm going to try is some looser gaiters, because if that was the reason why I developed that irritation at the front of my ankle, it's definitely worth giving it a go, something a bit looser and more comfortable. And the other thing I'll try is bigger shoes, because from what I understand, it's any kind of restriction of your foot can help make that maceration worse. So my Saucony Peregrine 12s are a little bit narrower than the Exodus Ultras, and I wonder if that had anything to do with it. So I'm gonna just bear that in mind the next time I buy a pair of shoes. Okay, number crunching. So as I said, I went in with a goal of 36 hours, maybe if I was having a brilliant day, 32. So that first section from Coverack to Porthleven, I was on the 33-hour pace mark. So Colin Baith, who did the GPX file for the course, which was spot on, and also has created a lovely document compiling everybody's data over the years to give you an idea of if you get to a checkpoint at this time, you can expect to finish in this many hours. So we used that as a guide. The section between Porthleven and Penzance sped up a little bit, so I was then going more towards the 31 hours and even dipped into about 30 hours as I got to Penzance. Where things kind of improved even more, I think, was the Mousehole to Land's End section. And actually that corresponds with my favourite bit of the course, which might be a bit of a surprise to you. I really loved the Mousehole to Porthcurno section, the going through Lamorna and all the boulder hopping. It was so much fun, and it really kept me mentally stimulated and entertained. And I think my strength and conditioning training had really helped me have the resilience to go through all those ups and downs and climbing. So yeah, really had a good time. So at that point I was around the 30 hours and dipped into the 29 and just under 29. Land's End to St Ives, although I felt like I was really dragging myself through that section, I was starting to go into the sub 29 hours at that point. A lot of the times that I came into checkpoints I was going around, aiming for that 29 hours. But at that time I didn't really know that. In fact, I didn't really pay attention to whether I was ahead of time, behind time. I just went by the light. So I knew, for example, going into Porthleven that it was still light as I approached that checkpoint, therefore I knew I was ahead of the cutoff. So I felt comfortable I wasn't chasing cutoffs, but beyond that I didn't really know what sort of pace I was doing. So it was a great surprise when I got to St Ives and started paying a bit more attention to my watch and realised that if I kept moving, actually I could get a sub 30 hour. And this became apparent, there was a few of us that were having this conversation. Now my watch was giving me an estimated time of arrival and I wasn't really trusting it because I thought, well, it doesn't know what's coming. It doesn't know those horrible big climbs and it doesn't know how much I'm slowing down. But I kept an eye on it and it still hovered below that 30 hours. And that was amazing because it meant that me and a few of the other runners were able to egg each other on and push each other to run the flats whenever we could and not get tired and just accept extra walking time. So we pushed on, kept running when we could. And yeah, so the outcome of the race, I managed to do it in 28 hours and 43 minutes something, and I couldn't believe it. I genuinely couldn't believe it. It was just beyond my wildest dreams. I'd had the timings for 30 hours written down so I could compare at some point later on, just maybe for improving for next time. I didn't in a million years think I'd actually achieve it on my first arc, and I managed to get this beautiful shiny gold buckle, which is still a total shock. I think all the training that I put in, the preparation, I will take some credit for that. I worked really hard and that gave me the potential to achieve what I did in that race. But 100 miles is a really long way and anything can happen, and that's part of the appeal of these kinds of races. So I think that an outcome isn't necessarily reflective of a person's ability as a runner. I know plenty of people out there that are much better runners than me. They're stronger, they've got more experience, and they didn't have a good day. It was just one of those things. So although I'm proud I did put in the work, I'm also extremely grateful because I know that it was because the stars aligned and the people, right through from the Mud Crew team to fellow competitors and then my friends and my husband, everybody had a really important part to play in me being able to get that gold buckle. So thank you. I don't take it for granted, and I have a huge amount of respect for people that went through that race and overcame a lot of really, really tough experiences, and whether they finished the race or not, absolutely incredible. It was brutal out there, but beautifully brutal. Such a fantastic race, couldn't recommend it enough. So would I do another 100 miler? Absolutely yes, I loved it. I think it's a great distance. It's just which one do I do? I quite fancy a Centurion race, and then people talked about some lovely races while we were out on the course, so I'm going to have a look at those. And would I do the Arc again? Yeah, I think I would. I had such a good time. Knowing myself, I'm going to get terrible FOMO if I don't do it next year. So maybe not next year, I don't know, haven't decided, but I would love to do it again. I feel like I learned a lot and that I could try and apply it for another go. But I just want to go back to see the Arc family. Just such a great group of people and such a lovely experience. So maybe next time I'll be brave enough to take my camera. I'll try and take my camera a bit more on races. I've been a little bit of a wimp about it, if I'm honest. But yeah, I'll practice. I'll do my best. Let me know if you find these kinds of videos useful or interesting. Any questions, anything that I didn't cover, please put it in the comments below. I'll do my best. And until next time. So I'll take you out on a run soon. Take care of yourself and have a great week.